home, I think of a place where there's love overflowing. I wish I was home, I wish I was back there with the things I've been knowing, waves that make the tall grass.
Hi, my name is Larry White, and I am your producer and director of The Inner Beat. The Inner Beat is a socially conscious program that sometimes showcases cultural events as well as community events. And occasionally, we'll even bring a little song and dance. So sit back and enjoy The Inner Beat.
You see, you're never going to find two snowflakes alike. And there's always going to be a disagreement or a different point of view amongst any group of people. But there are things that we can agree on, and those things that we agree on, we should work on. But it's that kind of tribalism that brought us here to this country. So, my people suffer from a lack of knowledge. Why should we have an African-centered curriculum? That's a very, very good question. And I really, really thought about it, Brother Solomon. You know, why should we have an African-centered curriculum? Is it to boost our children's self-esteem? Well, that's good. I mean, I think our children knowing that we are the fathers and mothers of civilization and that we've created everything from language to art to music to food, seasoning, cooking. I mean, those things are important to know. I think that's good for their self-esteem. But actually, a parent spending time with their child is also good for their self-esteem. There's a saying that history is most qualified to reward us in our research. So why it's important for us to know these things to improve our children's self-esteem, it is more important to know where we came from. And it's more important to know that we developed these things that everybody studies now, like language, mathematics, transportation, art and music. It's important for us to know that we've influenced the development of Greek civilization, Europe civilization, Asian civilization, etc. But it's more important to understand how we went from the pyramids to the projects. How did we become slaves? Because history is most qualified to reward us in our research. See, it's not just good to study, in my opinion, African history, to celebrate what we've done. But I think it's also important to analyze the mistakes that we made so that we can be like Jewish people and say never again. It's important for us to know the process, and so that when you look at history, you're not looking at it as something that's just a past experience, but you're looking at it in the context of where we are today, and you're attempting to connect some kind of dots. Otherwise, we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes. I mean, we got to ask the question how we were made into slaves, because the people that came here were not slaves. And we also need to understand the slave behavior that was learned then that still exists today. We must connect the dots. So when I think about African-centered history, I think more importantly about knowing it so we can remove ourselves from the condition that we're in today, and that we can set our children on a course of mastery so that what we see with President Obama is reflected in the general culture in terms of the kind of behaviors that our children are involved in. And so the question to me is not why. Why is obvious. I think the question is how do we integrate African curriculum into the schools? And I wanted to take this time to speak from a perspective of an administrator, because it was just said earlier by Brother Hooper that we have to go from the rhetoric to the application. And so when you talk about the how, now you're talking specifically about how to actually make this relevant, meaningful, tangible in the minds of our children and in the minds of those who are responsible for teaching our children. But there are some impediments to how that I would like to talk about before we get to the how. But I will say this. I don't believe that African-centered education should be taught in isolation. I don't think it should be something separate and pulled out and that says African-centered curriculum. I think that we need to make the curriculum that is in the school African-centered. And there's a big difference between saying, okay, we're going to pull it out and we're going to call this your African-American history class. There's a big difference between that and going to a global history class and actually learning history that's truly reflective of the global experience. So that you don't call Western history global history. So, if we teach math, science, history, English language arts, every subject that I just mentioned has a history in terms of their own development. And if you study each one of these subjects, every one of them have an African influence. So just as a child will go to class and say, okay, we're going to study math, and they'll tell you about the father of math, they need to go to the real father of math. And teach the history of math from the beginning. Same thing with science. Same thing with English and technology. Now, when you look at world history, not only is it taught from a Western perspective, but it's also taught with a Western biasness. So when you go in the classroom, like I used to get in trouble with the teachers, you know, because my parents taught me, and you know, so I'm going to ask the question. And of course, anytime you really challenge a teacher, unfortunately, and those of you who are educators, you know this to be the truth. We don't like being challenged. We don't like when a child comes with a knowledge that's that's superior than ours. So that's going to get you a quick pass to the dean's office. But I don't think we should do that. I think we should enter into a dialogue with our children. When they present something challenging, we should say, let me think about that and get back to you. You know, there's a way to save face. But I used to ask my teachers when they said, they used to talk about Europe, and they used to talk about the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. And they would talk about history sort of like there was the Greek era, then from the Greek era there was sort of the whole European, French, English, Russia, they would talk about that. And then they would talk about the Dark Ages. And then after the Dark Ages, they would talk about something called the Renaissance. Now, mind you, they're teaching this as what? What kind of history? World history. And our world is not even mentioned. So I used
Wake up, everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what